Morning,
Morning,
Jurgen.
Jeff.
I was going to say good morning, Jurgen, right after church.
Well, I just wanted you to note, I got you, 5 extra minutes last week.
Well, that's, yeah. You're not on the naughty list. Welcome. So, I wanted to, first of all, start this season of Advent by saying that I like to start stories in weird places. And that's okay, because whenever there's a birth of a child, I found out that from a lot of experience, not a lot of experience, one event specifically, that there are multiple sources that will tell you various things. For example, my story when Jack was born consists of, not a lot of sleep. In fact, I found out that my emotions go woo when there's not a lot of sleep, and so at one point I went to the bathroom, and I remember I just broke down and cried until I felt dehydrated. And then I got out of the bathroom, and Carrie Ann heard me or something and said, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? Are you hurt? Is everything fine?" And I went, "Yeah." And all I needed to do was just get it out. I mean, I was fine. I was totally fine. But I started crying about various things. Like I think someone brought Carrie Ann flowers, and oh my goodness, they're so beautiful. And then there was someone came in and said that the something to the effect like they told me some event on the news, and I went, "That's lovely." I don't know. I was just all over the place. And then if you were to come in and you're my parents, you probably would have said, "Wow, Carrie Ann looks really put together, but Jeff looks terrible." I don't know. But there's always a couple sources when it comes to the birth of a child. And that's why I love the story in the Bible. It's because there's multiple things and multiple people that all of a sudden collide in this cosmically crazy timeline of events. And this week I wanted to start in a very, very strange place with the most strange, unknown, misunderstood characters of this whole story, the Magi. And so, would you turn your Bibles today to Matthew 2? Almost said Matthew the 2. It's not how you say that. Matthew 2. Now, you could begin at Matthew 1 if you enjoy reading, laundry lists, names, grocery lists, the dictionary. But I'm someone that likes to start the story at the very beginning of the story, so we're going to start there. But I thought that I would also comment with a little bit from Luke, because if you look at all of the apostles, some of them even leave it out, like Mark doesn't even start with this, John doesn't even start with this, but Luke doesn't even include the story of the Magi. In fact, Luke starts in a very different place. He says, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world." And then in my Bible it says in parentheses, this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Because Luke is really into trying to cite everything and make sure that you know exactly when this occurred. So, like I said, there's so many ways that this story could go. But today I want to start with a very misunderstood character. We're going to start in Matthew 2. We're actually going to start in verse 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was very disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report him to me, so that I may worship him as well." There should be dark music playing during that time, because King Herod, there's actually so much information about King Herod that when I began looking at this, it actually took me 2 weeks to boil this down into something that didn't resemble a whole bunch of papers strewn about on a desk, because that's what I had. There's so many primary sources about King Herod that it's almost overwhelming. King Herod's the first guy I want to fixate on. So in verse 3 it says this: "When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. I find that really funny. You know why? It says King Herod was disturbed. He really was disturbed. In fact, here's some of the primary sources. Now, there's two ways when you look at primary sources. Now, as a teacher, I'm supposed to tell you, always go with primary sources, because a primary source is someone who was there at the time. As Geoff, I'm going to tell you that primary sources are about as reliable as he said, she said. Because of this. For example, I read the autobiography of Winston Churchill one time. The entire autobiography, the intro to the Winston Churchill biography, is not events at all. It's Winston Churchill telling you why he wasn't wrong about the things that he did. And that's it. But it's still a primary source because he was there. There is a primary source from this time talking about King Herod. King Herod wrote his own autobiography. Did you know that? I didn't, and so I went and pored over it this week, and actually, it's really eye-opening. King Herod thought of himself as an amazing ruler. He wrote this later in life, and King Herod said, admittedly, that he had a disease at this point when he was writing this that actually made him very paranoid. But then he goes on to say, I was a great king of my time. In fact, I was admired even by my enemies and people that I conquered. That does not sound factual, does it? He also goes on to say that I was such a great king of my time because of all of the building projects that I undertook. When I came into office, I basically took nothing and I went and built it up into this majestic kingdom for myself. Wasn't I a great guy? And that's what he goes on to say. And I imagine him dictating that to a scribe, and I imagine the scribe scrawling things. And the scribe was probably doing one of two things. He was probably, one, either shaking with terror because of the next thing I'm going to tell you, or he was looking up from his eyebrows. You know how you're dictating when someone tells you about how great and awesome they are, and you're like... Alright? It's really funny because Herod was none of these things. Yes, he was feared. Yes, he was a great king. If he asked you, am I a great king? You'd better say yes, because Herod also does a few more things. According to Augustus, the Emperor Augustus was around at this point, and Emperor Augustus wrote everything down, and he said, quote, he had no sooner come to the throne than he began to annihilate the Sanhedrin. He slaughtered 300 court officers. He murdered his wife, Marianne, and her mother, Alexandria. He murdered his eldest son, Antipater, and two other sons, Alexander and Aristobulus. Augustus then begins to talk about how he actually feared going to meet with Herod because he wasn't sure if he was going to make it out alive. He says that even though I am the great and mighty ruler of the emperor of Rome, I myself am greatly concerned by the prospect of going to meet with Herod. Even the man who was Herod's boss was really afraid of this guy. Herod was a crazy dude. Later in life, he even does a whole laundry list of things to murder, kill, and destroy everybody in his kingdom just because he gets paranoid at the end of his life. He gets so paranoid, in fact, that he actually routinely changes the things that you have to do to go and see him. Sometimes when you go and see him, you have to offer him a gift, and he doesn't like that. Then he's done with gifts. And then the next time that you go and see him, you have to bring a staff, and it has to have a certain amount of gold on it and a certain amount of jewels on it, and you have to wrap it a certain amount of times when you get to the door. All of this stuff was written down at the time of the Romans because they kept exceptionally good records. So we know, without a doubt, that yes, when King Herod heard this, he was currently disturbed. But not because of this. He was just disturbed in general. The second thing that's really interesting about this is that, again, verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. There's something else that the Romans wrote down. There were two visits from the Magi. There was this visit right here. And then during another emperor, I forget his name, Nero. During the Emperor Nero's reign as well, Magi came out of the east again, as if almost echoing this time period, to warn him of something else. And that's neither here nor there, that's a longer story. But this is not unprecedented. So my question today, and when I kind of began studying this, I thought, we could talk about Herod all day, but I really want to talk about who the Magi were. My Sunday school teacher, but also youth leader when I was in high school was Ken Harvey, and he spoke here a few times, I believe. Ken Harvey had a Christmas quiz, and when I got done with that, and I began to teach, and I began to give out things, I actually contacted him by email, and I said, hey, I'm teaching at a Christian school. I was at Horizon Christian School at the time, and I said, it'd be kind of fun to see that Christmas quiz. Can you forward that to me so I can give it to my kids? I think they would find it really funny. And I turned it into an online fillable Google form where kids could actually take it in real time. And it's really funny because I know that Ken made it up himself, but most of the stuff on there is specifically designed to fool you if you're someone that grew up in the church. For example, one of the questions, I think question 3 of when I was looking at it this week on my Google form was, did Jesus cry? And that is something that made everybody really angry when I gave it at Horizon. First of all, Jesus was a baby. Babies cry. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that Jesus did not cry. And right now you're getting really angry with me if you don't, if you're right now like looking through your Bible trying to find it. But we get that from a song that states, no crying he made, right? And so I actually specifically have an answer, I think it's answer C actually on the test that says, no, Jesus did not cry, for it says in the Bible, no crying he made. 85% of kids picked that from Horizon. Kind of funny. And then when they got it wrong, because you can see your answers in real time, is how I kind of had it figured out. You can't see the actual new answer, but you can see the one that you got wrong. Oh my goodness, kids got so angry at me. I would hear just like, what? And I had a line of kids coming to me, basically demanding that I fix something they know from the Bible is a fact on that test. And that's how the entire test goes. And another question states this. How many wise men were there? The first answer you're probably thinking of is 3, right? Because every nativity scene that you've ever seen in your life has 3 wise men. One has gold, one has frankincense, and one has myrrh. And you know this because you've seen them before, and you know they travel on camels because you've seen that before. I mean, look at this. I even have a picture kind of to show you. There's obviously 3 in this picture. One's in the background there, and then 2 are in the foreground. One has dismounted because they've traveled a long way. And one carries gold, one carries frankincense, and one carries myrrh. Well, it's really interesting when you dive into the primary sources from the day when Nero was around. When Nero was around, he experienced wise men, magi, coming into his midst as well. And there were hundreds of them. In fact, there were so many of them that he personally, well, Nero was disturbed too, but he personally was disturbed by the amount and the number. It's almost like a sign. It's almost as if clouds come in and lightning begins to strike and gloomy music plays and you go, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? Why are there so many men? So I kind of took that and I superimposed it on this story. King Herod and all the people around the area would have been disturbed if hundreds of these men began to enter their city. Yes, it does state that there were 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but it doesn't state the quantity of them. So maybe there were hundreds of men, hundreds of gifts, and all of a sudden they descended on the town like a flood. And everybody looked out from their houses and went, what is happening? It would have been a procession, almost probably of silence because of the amount of distance they've traveled. It could be, it almost would be a little bit foreboding to see all of these men enter at the same time. And the gloomy music cues and plays, and you kind of wonder what is happening? What is going on? And the first place that they come, I think that's really cool, is they come to Herod himself, because they anticipate a few things. The first thing that they anticipate, if you go back to our verse there, is that they know the prophecy. They know their Bible really well, they know Scripture really well, and they know that there's been a prophecy about this great man to be born in this city. And so when they get there, they kind of, I imagine them being a little bit confused that not everybody is in an uproar over this already. I imagine them kind of walking through the streets and going, celebrating. Everybody seems to be going about their business. King Herod wants to meet with us personally about this. This doesn't make a lot of sense because don't you all know that there is a king that has been born? This doesn't make any sense that you don't know this. I didn't have any room to print this, but in verse 9 it says this. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star had been seen when it rose ahead of them until it stopped over the place that the child was. So they kind of continue past Herod. After they meet with him a little bit, they say, okay, we're going to go find this king, and then, sure, we'll report back to you. Now, the Magi actually would have heard, because Herod's fame had spread so far that we kind of assume that there's no way that the Magi would have actually not heard about the craziness of King Herod. So when King Herod says, I want to go see this king myself, we know he's paranoid, therefore we're not going to take this Messiah to Herod himself. We now know what's going on. We're going to go past him. We're just going to find out where the baby is. So after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star had been seen when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in the dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Imagine this. So if you've had kids before, imagine this, being in the hospital or being in the birthing center or wherever you had your child, and all of a sudden the door opens and hundreds of men in strange clothes filter in to that room. And you're sitting there going, okay. And you're kind of wondering, what do we do? Who are you? And I would wonder the same thing if I was Joseph and Mary, but there is no account that states that they were completely terrified by these events. There must have been some sort of aura of peace around them as they entered the stable. They saw the child. This wouldn't have been directly when Jesus was born. It would have been a few months afterwards. They saw the child. They saw the humble circumstance. They saw mother and father. And they said, let us bow and let us worship this child. There's a few things profound about this. Who are Magi? Magi, we know, are actually not Eastern philosopher types. They would have been outcast Jews. So while they practiced a different sort of faith, that they knew via kind of this almost an extradition that they had. These guys were kind of outcast, and so they would have kind of known the story. They would have known, as we know, they knew all the prophecy about Jesus coming, and they were actually astrologers. So they were men that focused on the stars. They also focused on kind of their own rhetoric and what they believed, but they also kind of melded that with the Judaism that they already knew, and it all seemed to line up for the first time, and they went, we must go. All of us must go. Hundreds of us must go, and we must worship this king. This is really weird too, because at this point in time, babies are not kings. I think we forget that. Babies are babies. And so when a baby is born, in order to become a king, babies are first princes. In order to become a king, you must have an ascension event to the throne, meaning father or mother up here is dead. Father and mother die. Little king ascends to the throne, and this happens all over the place. It happens in Egypt as well, when King Tutankhamun, also known as King Tut, ascends the throne. We know that his father, Akhenaten, had died, and so we know that since Akhenaten had died, there was an event. All of a sudden, King Tut enters the throne probably around 11 or 12 years old. This king would have been very, very young when he ascended the throne. So no matter how young you are, it doesn't really matter, but we know that there must be an ascension event. There was no ascension event. We also know that while this is a little baby boy, we know that in order for there to be a king, not always, but usually born to royal parents. These parents were not royal. They were obviously not royal by the amount of poverty that already existed. I mean, Joseph was a carpenter. But these men knew enough. They knew that this was the king, and they came to worship him. I think that's very interesting. There's also something that's really interesting. They bring 3 gifts. Now, there's no real precedent for this. I kind of looked it up and said, do you usually give gold, frankincense, and myrrh to a king back then? Actually, these are very random gifts. I don't know if they would have known that one of these is a burial spice. I don't think they would have, they might have known that, gold is something that you usually give to a king, but these are very kind of random gifts in order to give a baby king. It all just comes together in this beautiful, oddball way. There's no other story like this. And this definitely would have not only disturbed an entire community, but would have also been something to look at and go, wow. And there is a passage that says that Mary treasured up all these things in her hearts. And I think I would have too, as the father of this child, if I had seen this and gone, this is something that the world has never seen. The astronomical phenomenon that led the Magi to the Christ obviously simply led them to Jerusalem. And they expected the entire kingdom to be more excited than this. They also said, let us worship him. Whereas, like I said, usually a king would have had an ascension event. All these things kind of just compound the story and make you understand that Advent is an important thing. Now, I don't have a take-home message for you today. I don't have a go and do this for you today. I don't have a passage for you to read throughout this week, a thing for you to meditate on. But here's what I'm going to meditate on this week. Jesus came to seek and save all who were lost. And I think it is incredibly ironic that men that didn't even really didn't have any reference for this, had no experience that they should immediately believe in Jesus and he's going to save you from all of your sins and he's going to redeem the entire world, and it's been hundreds of years since this thing was predicted. They would have had no precedent for that, but yet they themselves, people that didn't even really, I don't think, comprehend what was about to happen next, they fell down on their faces before the King of the world and they bowed and they worshipped him. I need to live my life like a magi. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the gift of your Son in this amazing season, God, and all the things that are going to count down to the moment that we celebrate your birth, Lord. I thank you for magi, and I thank you just for the fact that this story could have never taken place anywhere besides here, could have never, if it happened any other way, any other time, it would have been just wrong. You knew exactly the time when this story needed to touch so many lives, and we thank you for that. Amen.
I love to chat with you. Oh, good message. Coming into the Advent season here, it's also a good Sunday to be doing communion. Got kind of a perfect trifecta. The first Sunday of Advent,